大家好，梦醒尤里第五关逆取顺守。我们暗杀了鲍里斯后，苏联最高指挥部对我们产生了怀疑，并且收回我们对苏军的控制权。看来我们在苏联的时间不长了，现在需要进入实验室，里面还有很多原型机蓝图和资料，用间谍去带走它们。由于是秘密执行任务，只给了我们一条狗子。算了，就让间谍一个人去完成任务吧。这片区域有4个实验室，直到获取到我们需要的资料就行。间谍要注意巡逻队的狗子。
Undercover. On my way. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Disguise ready. On my way. Operation underway. On my way. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Indeed. Disguise ready. On my way. On my way. Undercover. Undercover. Operation underway. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Indeed. Operation underway. Indeed. On my way. Indeed. Indeed. Operation underway. Indeed.
Building infiltrated. New terrain.
成功获取到了狂风坦克的蓝图。
Disguise ready. On my way. Operation underway.
我们抓紧去下一个实验室吧。
Indeed. On my way. On my way. Yes, Commander. On my way. Undercover. Indeed. Operation underway. Operation underway. Operation underway. On my way. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander.
Offline.
Operation underway. Undercover. Undercover. On my way. On my way. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. On my way. Operation underway. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. On my way. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Undercover. 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 Operation underway. Indeed. On my way. Undercover. Indeed.
Building online.
Operation underway. On my way. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Indeed. On my way. On my way. Operation underway.
Building infiltrated. New technology.
成功获取到了磁电科技蓝图。
Disguise ready. Indeed. Operation underway. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Indeed. Undercover. 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 Yes, Commander. Indeed. Indeed. Undercover.
现在去右下方绿色苏军实验室。
Unit
Yes,
firepower
Commander.
upgraded.
Operation underway. Operation underway. On my way. On my way. Undercover. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. On my way. On my way. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Give me a plan. Operation underway. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Give me a plan. Give me a plan. Give me a plan. Agent ready. Mission, sir? Give me a plan. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Indeed. Indeed. Undercover. Disguise ready. On my way. Yes, Commander. Agent ready. Commander? Undercover. Operation underway. Undercover. Indeed. Mission, sir? Agent ready. On my way. Operation underway. On my way. Indeed. On my way. Yes, Commander. On my way. On my way. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. On my way. Undercover. Undercover. Indeed. Undercover. Undercover. On my way. On my way. On my way. Indeed. Operation underway. Undercover. Undercover. Disguise ready. Indeed. On my way. On my way. Operation underway. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Undercover. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Undercover. Indeed.
Building infiltrated. New technology.
好了，最后一个实验室在上方。
Disguise ready. Operation underway. On my way. Undercover. Operation underway. Undercover. Operation underway. Indeed. On my way. Undercover. On my way. Operation underway. Indeed. Indeed. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Undercover. Operation underway. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Undercover. Yes, Commander. On my way. Undercover. Undercover. Indeed. On my way. Agent ready. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Indeed. Disguise ready. Indeed. On my way. Operation underway. Operation underway. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Indeed. On my way. Undercover. Indeed. Operation underway. On my way. On my way. Operation underway. Undercover. On my way. Undercover. On my way. On my way. Indeed. Indeed. Undercover. On my way. Indeed. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Indeed.
Building infiltrated. New technology.
原来这个实验室啥也没有，现在赶快撤离吧。
Operation underway.
Timer started.
Yes, Commander.
在最后的时间内到达接应我们的机场去。
Operation underway. Undercover. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Operation underway. Commander. Operation underway. Indeed. Undercover. Indeed. On my way. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Operation underway. On my way. Indeed. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Indeed. Undercover. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. Operation underway. Undercover. Indeed. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. On my way. Obtaining intelligence. Indeed. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Yes, Commander. Give me a plan. Agent ready. Commander? Agent ready. Mission, sir? Give me a plan. Disguise ready. Yes, Commander. On my way. Yes, Commander. Undercover. On my way. Operation underway. On my way. Yes, Commander. On my way. Undercover. Operation underway. Mission, sir? Undercover. Operation underway. On my way. Undercover. Indeed.
Objective complete. Mission accomplished.